On a bleak winter morning in 2023, the search and rescue team in the remote north of Canada received an unexpected call they never anticipated. Forester Jim Rodriguez spoke excitedly over the phone. "There's a man here, but something is very strange." This man was identifying himself as Michael Thomson, wearing a pilot's uniform, and constantly claiming they were living in the year 2003. Even stranger, this man's appearance showed no signs of aging, as if time had never touched him at all. But who was Michael Thomson? And where had he really been for 20 years? This story would reveal how deceptive time can be and expose the darkest secrets of the human mind. Michael Thomson was born in 1958 in Massachusetts to a middle-class family. His fascination with the sky had never diminished since childhood. When his father took him to the airport at age 8, seeing the aircraft was like magic to Michael. He would definitely become a pilot when he grew up. At 18, he entered the Air Force Academy. There he fell in love with Linda, whom he met. They married in 1985, and 2 years later, their son David was born. Life was perfect for Michael. He was doing the job he loved and had a happy family. After completing his military service, Michael switched to civilian aviation. He initially worked for major airlines, then realized his dream of starting his own charter company. Showing tourists Alaska's magnificent nature was not just a job for him, it had become a passion. By 2003, Michael was 45 years old, an experienced and respected pilot. He had never had a serious accident in his 15-year career. His marriage with Linda was still strong, and their 16-year-old son David was proud of his father's profession. On the morning of October 15, 2003, Michael woke up early as usual. That day he would take 4 passengers to see Alaska's magnificent landscapes. The weather was perfect. The wind was calm. It would be a normal tour flight. While having breakfast, Linda said to him, "Don't forget David's school meeting tonight." Michael smiled and replied, "I'll be home at 6 p.m. These were the last words he said to Linda. When he arrived at the airport, his passengers were already waiting. Margaret Foster, a 62-year-old retired English teacher, had been saving money for years to see Alaska. Sarah and Mark Williams were a young couple who had chosen Alaska for their honeymoon. Robert Chen was an Asian businessman looking for investment opportunities in the region. Michael checked his aircraft one last time. The small Cessna 172 was in perfect condition. The engine sounds were normal, the fuel tank was full, weather conditions were ideal. He suspected nothing. They took off at 2:30 p.m. Michael would show his passengers the peaks of Denali Mountains, glaciers, and endless forest cover. Everything was going as planned. 2 hours after takeoff, while flying at 3,000 feet altitude, Michael's attention was caught by a small light on the control panel. The engine temperature indicator was glowing red. He didn't worry at first. Maybe it was a temporary malfunction. But as minutes passed, the situation worsened. The engine sound began to change. Vibrations increased. Michael's experienced ears told him this was a serious malfunction. His heart began to race, but he tried to appear calm so his passengers wouldn't panic. "Anchorage Tower, this is Thomson," he said into his radio. "We're experiencing engine temperature problems. Monitoring the situation." Just then, a terrible sound was heard. The engine had completely stopped. The aircraft was suddenly engulfed in silence. He could only hear the sound of wind now. Margaret asked fearfully from behind, "What's happening?" Michael could no longer hide it. "We're experiencing engine failure," he said. "I'm going to make an emergency landing." The aircraft was rapidly losing altitude. Below stretched kilometers of forest. No open area, no airport was visible. Michael used all his experience to put the aircraft into gliding mode. Sarah had started crying. Mark was holding his wife's hand tightly. Robert Chen was silently looking out the window. Margaret was praying. 2,000 feet, 1,500 feet. The aircraft continued to descend. Michael searched intently for a landing spot. There he saw a small clearing among the trees. It was very small, but it was their only chance. "Everyone, check your seatbelts," he shouted. "We're making a hard landing." The impact was terrible. When the aircraft hit the ground, there was a tremendous crash. Metal groaned, windows cracked. Michael tried to keep the aircraft balanced by holding the controls tightly. The second impact was even more violent. The aircraft's left wing hit a tree. The fuselage spun. Sounds came from the passengers, then terrible silence. When Michael opened his eyes, it was night. There was throbbing in his head. He felt a cut on his lip. He slowly straightened up. The aircraft had sustained serious damage. The front window had cracked. The control panel was damaged. He heard moaning behind him. Margaret had been injured on her head and was unconscious. Sarah had fainted. Mark's arm was injured. Robert's leg was severely injured. Michael didn't panic. His experience kicked in. He checked the radio, but it was damaged. His cell phone had no signal. The nearest settlement was dozens of kilometers away. He bandaged his passengers' wounds as best he could, but they all needed serious medical attention. If they stayed here, they would be seriously affected by the cold. Someone had to call for help. "I'll bring help," he told his passengers. "I'll definitely come back." Margaret opened her eyes with difficulty and nodded. Sarah pleaded tearfully, but Michael knew there was no other choice. When he stepped into the forest, it was 2 a.m. Alaska's October cold penetrated to his bones, but the thought of saving his passengers kept him going. The first hours were difficult. Every step in the snow-covered ground was a struggle. His shoes weren't suitable for these conditions. He tried to stay warm with his pilot's uniform. Michael walked until morning. When the sun rose, he looked at where he was. Only trees, trees, and more trees. At this pace, it would take days. But thinking of Margaret's condition, Sarah's fear, and Mark's injury made him try to walk faster. He continued without rest, only eating snow to quench his thirst. The second day became even more difficult. His feet had swollen. There were signs of cold effects on his fingers, but he continued. He had to go back. On the third day, he was already in autopilot mode. He was taking steps, breathing, walking. The same thoughts constantly went through his mind. How were his passengers? How was Margaret's condition? That evening he saw a building in the forest. It looked like an abandoned research station. When he went inside, he realized how tired he was. His legs were trembling. His head was spinning. Inside the station were old equipment, canned food, clean water. There was even a working generator. Michael opened a few cans and ate. His body gained some energy. "I'll rest a bit," he thought. "Then I'll continue." When he lay down on an old bed, his eyes closed. He was very tired. Everything hurt. "Just a short sleep," he murmured. But Michael's sleep didn't go as he had planned at all. In his dreams, he constantly saw his passengers, wondering about their condition. Sometimes, he thought he was awake, trying to go outside, but he was so tired that he fell asleep again. Days began to pass, and Michael's body was getting long sleeps to meet its rest needs. When he woke up intermittently, he would eat some food, drink water, then sleep again. His body needed recovery so much that he couldn't control himself. Time seemed to flow differently inside the station. It wasn't clear whether it was day or night. Days blended into each other. Michael's mind was clouded with fatigue. Sometimes he would look at the snowy landscape outside and think about his passengers. How were they? Were they still waiting? These thoughts bothered him, but he felt so exhausted that he couldn't take action. Winter lasted very long, according to Michael. The snow was so heavy that it was difficult to go outside. He continued to wait inside the station. The canned food was sufficient. There was also water. Michael's mind was very clouded during that period. Sometimes he remembered the past. Sometimes he made plans for the future, but he never felt completely clear. In his dreams, he saw Linda and David. He was sad for not being able to return home, apologizing to them. "Wait a little longer," he said in his dreams. "I'll rescue my passengers and come right away." Months passed this way. Michael was in a half-asleep, half-awake state. While his body rested, his mind constantly thought about his passengers. Their condition bothered him. Finally, spring came. At least that's how Michael felt. The snow seemed to be starting to melt. Now he could go outside. It was time to return to his passengers. When Michael woke up and got up, he felt strange. He felt like he had slept for a very long time. His body ached. His head was throbbing. But now he had to take action. When he went outside, the landscape didn't seem familiar to him. Everything looked different. The trees seemed bigger. The environment seemed changed, but he had to continue searching for help. While walking in the forest, he heard sounds from afar. Helicopter sound. Finally, help had come. Michael ran toward the sounds, trying to show himself by waving his arms. When the search and rescue helicopter saw him and descended, Michael was very excited. Finally, he could bring help to his passengers. But the expression on the team leader's face surprised him. "Are you Michael Thomson?" they asked. And Michael didn't hesitate at all. "Yes, my plane crashed. My passengers are injured. It's been about a year. We need to go to them immediately." The response from team leader Sarah Miller shook Michael's world. "Michael, today is November 12th, 2023. You've been missing for 20 years. Michael's head throbbed. Ringing started in his ears. This wasn't possible. Only a year had passed. Maybe a little more. How could it be 20 years? While being taken to the hospital by helicopter, Michael was in shock. 20 years. What had happened to Margaret, Sarah, Mark, and Robert? Had they waited that long? When he arrived at the hospital, the first thing he did was look in a mirror. He experienced the shock of seeing himself. He hadn't aged much. There were white strands in his hair, slight lines on his face, but this wasn't 20 years of aging. The tests doctors performed were surprising. Michael's body was like that of a 47-year-old man, but his birth certificate showed 1958. Mathematically, he should have been 65 years old. Brain scans found damage in the hippocampus region, most likely due to the trauma he suffered in the crash. His time perception had been disrupted. He had perceived 20 years as only 1 year. But the truly sad news for Michael was what he learned about his passengers. A major search operation had been conducted in 2003. Hundreds of volunteers, helicopters had worked for weeks, but neither the plane wreckage nor the passengers could be found. According to records, those 4 people had unfortunately lost their lives. They couldn't be rescued due to cold weather conditions. Michael had gone to save them, but couldn't be fast enough. This truth deeply saddened Michael. For 20 years he had thought about them, but didn't know the truth. He wished he hadn't left them. He wished he had stayed with them and looked for a solution together. Seeing his family brought mixed emotions. His son David was now 36 years old, married, and a father of 2 children, working as an engineer. He only knew Michael from childhood photos. "Are you really my father?" he asked, and Michael's heart tightened. He had missed his son's childhood, youth, marriage. He had lost 20 years of fatherhood. Linda had long since married someone else, a good man named Tom, and built a new life. They had an 18-year-old daughter named Emily, a stepdaughter Michael had never known. "When you disappeared, I went through very difficult times, Michael," Linda had said. "I mourned you, rebuilt my life. Now this situation is difficult for all of us." Adapting to the modern world wasn't easy for Michael either. Smartphones, internet, social media, everything had changed. The world he had left in 2003 no longer existed. He couldn't be a pilot anymore. He was considered too old. His license was invalid. He started working simple jobs. He lived alone in a small apartment, trying to reconcile with his past. Nights were difficult. In his dreams, he constantly saw those 4 passengers. He felt responsible for not being able to save them. Michael started going to a psychologist. As he talked, he began to accept the realities. There were natural minerals under that abandoned research station. These minerals had affected his metabolism, slowing down his aging process. At the same time, due to brain trauma, his time perception had been completely disrupted. He might have entered a long-term sleep state. The mind's self-protection mechanism had kicked in. David and he slowly began to bond. His son patiently taught him the modern world. He introduced him to his grandchildren, who also accepted Michael as their grandfather. He also started meeting with Linda occasionally. They reminisced about old times, talked about the past. Linda was no longer angry with him. She understood the situation. But similar questions always remained in Michael's mind. How had those 20 years really passed? Was he just sleeping, or had he done other things too? Sometimes he would go to that old research station, sit there and think. Maybe one day he would remember everything. Maybe he would solve the mystery of those lost years. 2 years passed this way. Michael was slowly beginning to adapt to his life. His relationship with David had strengthened. He had become very attached to his grandchildren. He was also happy at his job. But the memory of his passengers never left his mind. Every October 15th, on the anniversary of the crash, he would remember them and apologize. Michael was now 49 years old, but his body was still like that of a 47-year-old. Time seemed to flow differently for him. His metabolism was slow. His aging was delayed. Maybe this was a second chance. He couldn't compensate for the 20 years he had lost, but he was determined to make the best use of his remaining time. Every morning he would look at his face in the mirror and ask himself, did he really know who he was? How had time passed so quickly? Maybe he would never fully learn, but he continued to live because life had given him a second chance, and he had to make use of it. The memory of his passengers would live in his heart forever. He was sad for not being able to save them, but he also knew he couldn't change the past. Michael Thomson's story reminded us how precious time is. When a moment is lost, it cannot be returned. But holding on to life, protecting our loved ones, is always possible. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next video.